Hi, this is the NASEO NARUC Microgrid Working Group webinar. Okay. Getting started in just a second.
For future reference, restrooms, if you head out of this room, take a right where somebody else has breakfast set up. And there's an exit sign that will direct you to the right. There are restrooms basically around the corner. It's not far, it's not well timed.
And there are handouts from Sandia on this chair here if you didn't grab them.
Can everyone sign in with Charles?
I tried to catch everyone, but if not, then I don't want to you can come by.
So welcome everyone to day 2 of our NASEO NARUC Roundtable. So today we're going to welcome everyone back. We'll hear from Nick at the Office of Electricity, and then we have a series of 4 presentations from some of our federal partners, Sandia National Lab, the National Renewable Energy Lab, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and the EPA. Started with Dan.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm going to just provide an overview of our programs and the tools that we develop in the Office of Electricity. Okay. So the DOE Microgrid R&D program is within the Office of Electricity under the Advanced Grid Research Department. So the Microgrid program is conducting research and development to help enhancing the resilience of the grid as well as the critical infrastructure. We also looking into reliability, restoration, and recovery of those critical infrastructure and the grid. In addition, we also wanted to focus on efficiencies and flexibility. So our thrust is as part of the grid modernization within the whole department. And the grid modernization, we not only focusing on technology, innovation, security, and resilience, but also working with states and other stakeholders in terms of institution support and alignment. And this working group is part of that effort. So we are working on different type of applications as well as business model. And so basically in the term of type of microgrid, we are looking at remote island, applications such as areas in like Alaska. We're looking at applications into grid connected areas, urban, also different type of microgrids such as AC, DC, or hybrid, and different scales. And also in the market side, we're looking at different type of, market segments from defense to industrial, commercial, as well as different type of ownership from customer owner to utility owner. So our program is focusing on 3 main areas here. We're working with national labs to develop foundational R&D, so things like models, analysis, tools, things of that nature to help optimization of design, planning, and operation of the microgrid. We're working with private sector on commercial adoption of technologies. So yesterday we heard of a couple of the applications, one in ComEd, the Illinois one, is part of this demonstration to develop and demonstrate the viability of microgrid controller. And then we're working with the state to help providing technical assistance and help deployment and adoption of the technologies. So a little bit more about the activities with the states. We have technical assistance activities, including developing models and tools and help them to adopt. And we provide training to help using those tools and models. We help with energy master planning. Sandia is going to talk a little bit more about that. Some of the cost-benefit analysis and technical feasibility and some of the activities under this umbrella. We're also providing technical resources to help with the grant solicitation, review of the proposal, etc. And we also do solicitation and awards. And other activities, related to technical assistance in the state. So one of the things that we wanted to tackle is improving the cost of microgrid. So in order for microgrid to be economically feasible, we have to design a microgrid that can work in the blue sky condition as well as in black sky. And so this is a typical process when we do master planning. Under the blue sky analysis, we wanted to maximize minimize the CapEx and OpEx and maximize the return of investment. We do simulation to analyze to see whether the design is operationally feasible. And Cat Island with different type of scenario. When something happens, we look at the threats and we want to make sure that the microgrid is designed to overcome, right, to improving resiliency under that kind of scenario. And then when we combine the tool, we do simulation to look at both thermal and electrical analysis to come up with a design so that we can communicate with the stakeholders. And so we found that there's no single tool that can truly optimize both resilience, efficiency, sustainability, and to ensure the design is physically feasible and realistic. And so we have been working with a suite of tools, and so today we're gonna have NREL presenting their part, REOP tools, and we have Sandia for their tools, and then also Lawrence Berkeley to talk about their tools. So looking forward to their presentations and feedback from the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions for Dan? You can make it the usual NARUC practices to get your card up. Sure.
Dan's last slide, he showed blue sky and black sky. And one of our microgrid customers has the notion of green sky. That's when you have excess solar on the system. So we can kind of manage that. Nice little terminology.
Okay. To us, it's blue sky. So now we can
Green sky.
Green sky.
And I should just remind everyone that we are doing this as a webinar again today for some remote participants. So we have the phone set up there. So particularly for the presenters, it's helpful to make sure that, you're getting pretty close to the phone anyway, but if you could just kind of direct your voice into the phone or into one of the microphones. All right. I think we can probably skip over introductions. Did yesterday, and just move right into the Sandia presentation.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Will McNamara, and I'm with Sandia National Labs. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to NARUC-NASEO. It's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces in the room, having been at NASEO last week. So we really do appreciate this opportunity to introduce the framework that has been developed at Sandia for quantifying and implementing resilience plans, particularly at a city and or district level. I'm going to do things a bit old school today. I've got the Word document printed out as a hard copy for you. And so I'm going to use this to talk through our process and also provide a real-world case study, how the tool is used in the city of New Orleans. So the tool actually has been in development now for 3 or 4 years. It was originally put together to address the economic valuation of resilience-focused grid investments. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, which funded a group at Sandia and Los Alamos National Laboratory, and with the specific charter to develop and apply an approach for identifying and prioritizing grid investments targeted at improving community resilience. So that was the mission of the framework when it began. Again, the project is funded through the DOE's Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium and is really the first of its kind to collaboratively address grid investments aimed at minimizing extreme consequences to a particular community. Now, Sandia defines resilience as the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. This includes the ability to withstand and recover from deliberate attacks, accidents, or naturally occurring threats or incidents. Based on this definition, Sandia and our colleagues have developed this mathematical framework to calculate, project, and improve resilience efforts. So now I'm going to walk through an overview of the framework, and then I'll talk about a specific application. There are a set of guiding questions that really help us to apply the framework, and these are fairly general questions that could be universally applied. But when we look at resilience efforts in a particular community, we first start out looking at, well, what are the characteristics in that region of extreme events that would result in worst case consequence for the community, and how is that consequence going to be measured? In the case of these extreme events, how would the grid perform in that region? What infrastructure services could be impacted due to a loss of power? What is the consequence of having these service outages? In addition, what grid modernization options will minimize these consequences, thereby improving community resilience? How can these options be designed to work within the current grid within a particular region? And finally, what are the scale and cost of the grid improvements that would be needed to improve community resilience? How would resilience metrics be best defined and utilized for future community planning and adaptation to future resilience challenges and needs? So again, kind of guiding principles that we start out with. Now, the framework relies on estimating the performance of specific systems within a region of interest during extreme events and translating that performance into metrics of consequence. We define metrics of consequence into 2 main categories. There are community measures, which includes the number of people that might face disruption without necessary services, lives that may be put at risk, and any net population change as a result of the event. There are also economic measures measuring the gross municipal product loss, change in capital wealth, and business interruption costs. So those are all quantified within this process. Now, there are 5 stages of our urban resilience planning process, which we call the framework. There is a chart in this handout, and the chart works in a clockwise format, and is iterative until various measures are thoroughly quantified. So it's not just we go through the process once and we're done. It's a continuing process until sufficient plans have been developed. So I'm going to walk you through the 5 steps. The first step is the identification of threats. And again, this is going to be very unique to a particular region. Could be weather-driven events such as hurricanes, tornadoes. It could be a cyber attack that could happen. But anything that might result in an extended power outage typically would fall under the identification of threats. Again, very unique to a specific community. The second step is we work with the community to identify what tools they may already have in place, what data they may have in place. Then we augment that with data that has been collected through Sandia, through the DOE, and through our fellow labs. Of course, the data that is coming from a particular community is often proprietary, but we do bring in our public data to augment that. The third step is assessing the performance of infrastructures of concern subject to the events that were identified in step 1. And so the performance can be measured through outage frequency, number of customers impacted, outage duration, or a combination of the above, such as customers impacted multiplied by the duration. The fourth step is mapping grid resilience to infrastructure services, including identification of those services that have low baseline resilience, some without any backup power. Infrastructure services that could be impacted might include the 911 system, emergency services, police and fire, shelters, including city-assisted shelters and hotels, medical services, hospitals, air ambulance, provision such as pharmacies, gas stations, groceries, etc., and wastewater services. Fifth step is to specify infrastructure improvements. So these would be the specific resilience activities that a community identifies and would like to put in place. The improvements take into account both the infrastructure services needed at a granular zonal level and the cost of adding resilience to those services. At the end of the process, the stakeholders engaged gain measurable resilience metrics useful in their existing planning processes and an analysis of how potential resilience enhancing solutions will improve these metrics. So as I said, the framework has been in place for several years now. We have used it with the city of Norfolk, Virginia, Puerto Rico, and the city of New Orleans. I'm going to use the city of New Orleans as a case study to show you how the practical application might work. In the city of New Orleans, with step 1, identification of threat, it was determined that hurricanes and severe storms accompanied by large rainfall is the threat of highest concern in that region. And I think we've all witnessed that with the news, the events that have occurred. A reasonable worst consequence storm is a Category 2 or a low Category 3 hurricane in which the city does not issue a mandatory evacuation and the storm stalls over the city of New Orleans, dropping 20 to 25 inches of rain over a period of 24 hours. That was considered to be their worst case extreme situation. In this case, the city of New Orleans partners indicated that many people would be displaced and in need of infrastructure services. This represents the design basis threat for the application of the framework in the city of New Orleans. And it was used as that threat for which resilience measures were evaluated. Step 2, again, very proprietary to the city of New Orleans, but we did an assessment of their tools and data, augmented it with data from Sandia, Los Alamos, and DOE. For step 3 at the City of New Orleans involved the analysis of 3 factors: wind and inundation impacts of the design basis threat, power system performance subject to the design basis threat, and infrastructure services subject to the design basis threat and the power system performance. And the analysis of those 3 conditions showed that infrastructure served by overhead distribution lines in vegetated areas were at the highest risk of extended outage due to the extreme event, followed by infrastructure served by overhead lines and less vegetation, areas with underground service and high potential for flooding. Step 4, where we mapped grid resilience to infrastructure services, the resilience metric chosen for the study in New Orleans was the percentage of infrastructures with sufficient backup power. And that focused on lifeline infrastructure services and the ability to support the critical needs of the community. Now, we did recommend a series of infrastructure improvements specific to the City of New Orleans that came out of this study, and they were advanced microgrids. So we were suggesting, or we did suggest, that advanced microgrids utilize automated controls to tie together a collection of facilities within a relatively small geographic area using one or more points of common coupling, otherwise known as PCCs, to the utility. These PCCs are switching devices that can automatically segregate the microgrid from the distribution system in an outage situation. The second recommendation was distribution system flexibility and automation, such as automated reclosers, automated fault location, system recovery, Flizer software, which we believe could provide the grid operator with much faster control over distribution switching and reconfiguration, thereby greatly decreasing outage durations, especially for smaller disruptions. The third recommendation was localized backup generation, building tiered backup generators as being the most common method of supplying power to a facility to enable operation of critical functions during utility outages. Now, in the near term, the City of New Orleans is looking at these recommendations and continuing further research with our support and various partners within the region. In the long term, populating the community-focused resilience metrics suggested requires overcoming significant science and technology gaps, for instance, the projection of future threats, projection of future population needs. So the point there is that what I just described, the process that we went through, is considered a phase 1 for the City of New Orleans. Phase 2 was completed in early 2019, and that developed more detailed designs and co-optimized microgrid designs to balance the value for blue sky and black sky scenarios. So again, the framework is available for public use. We believe it's a very strong model for identifying, projecting, and quantifying resilience investments. My colleague at Sandia is Dr. Bobby Jeffers, and he leads this effort within Sandia. He unfortunately was not able to make today's meeting, but if there is interest in the framework, please do contact either Bobby or myself, and we would be happy to begin a discussion of how the framework could be applied in specific communities. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this introduction to our framework.
Okay, well, we'll move into questions now. Kristen, start? Yeah, just following up on what you said. So essentially, where a state is interested in using the framework, effectively, what kind of opportunities are there, especially funding terms? How does it work? How do cities make use of this framework? How much guidance do you provide, or is it something that they use on their own? Maybe you can.
Sure. So we are directly involved, and we partner with the city that would be using the framework. So we are directly involved on the ground throughout the process. funding is going to have variances depending on the scope of the study, the size of the city, and a number of other unique factors. So I can't speak to any specifics along those lines, but I want to reiterate the fact that Sandia is a partner in this effort, and we remain engaged with the city throughout the process. But Bobby can certainly provide input on some cost estimates in an initial discussion that the city might have with us.
Yeah, to add into that one, my program is providing funding through Sandia, and we're looking at about 2 cities or 2 areas for feasibility study and assessment a year. So right now we have gone through New Orleans and Pittsburgh, and now we are looking at Norfolk and another application on another area in 2020. But for 2021 and beyond, I think we probably have a list, and then we prioritize based on that, and then we'll support the community based on the process.
I was wondering what the ownership model of this microgrid that you sort of put in New Orleans, is it owned by the utility? Is it owned?
Well, this was used for a city, so we primarily use the framework in city locations, such as the city of New Orleans and the city of Norfolk, and they do have ownership rights of the plan upon completion.
The municipality owns it?
They own the output. They own the study results. They own the recommendations. Is that what you mean?
No, actually, I'm sorry, I'm probably not. This is my first cup of coffee.
Oh.
What I meant is have you actually implemented like the switchgear, put the microgrid in place? You're using obviously distribution systems that would be utility owned.
Right.
Correct. I don't know what the municipal utility is, or if it's an IOU in New Orleans, but we've been sort of in the last days talking a lot about this whole, hey, utilities, come let us put a microgrid on this, it'll be resilient. And you mentioned blue sky days too.
Yeah.
So you can use this to shape the peak, and so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, or how this works in practical.
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak to that because the case study that I'm most familiar with is the city of New Orleans, and they've not gotten to the point of actually implementing those designs. Do you have input on that question?
Yes, so that's so once we have the design, and so the city is in the process of getting funding through either FEMA or HUD, and then once they do that, they will put out a solicitation to look at how can the recommendations going to be implemented. And so the ownership models and things like that is not something that we can.
So kind of to be determined.
There is, just to add a point on your question, New Orleans is unique in that it is a city, it's a municipal utility, and it's overseen by the city government. So it will be interesting to see how all of that plays out, but it is not in a traditional IOU structure.
Why don't we go to the other, Megan?
When you talk about the anticipation of flood and the extended power outages, is there like a guideline on what is defined as extended? Is it 1 day or 5 days? Because I'm asking this question is because you touched upon grid loss and reliability. I'm trying to think of that. Where is that line when it becomes a resiliency issue, when there's a reliability? Because a lot of the things states and cities are doing it anyway. So I'm wondering what this is like an additional framework on top of maybe extreme events, but where do we draw that line? And I almost feel like we have another resilience planning process where we're just kind of repeating the efforts if we don't have a clear identification of, okay, this is what is already going on in terms of reliability. We have very stringent performance metrics, and we have measurement of that. And for resiliency, I'm trying to understand where that definition is.
Well, I do know that in the city of New Orleans, they used both hourly definitions of outages and day outages, so multiple days, incorporating safety data in that quantification. So an extended outage in the New Orleans case study was measured in terms of days, but again, that could vary depending on the city's particular needs.
Yeah, I think it's location dependent. So I think that it's nice to have a model where you can play within different scenarios. So really, it's a stakeholder process where you come in and say, I want to protect my critical infrastructure for 5 days. This is the recommendation, which is how much it would cost to do that, depending on the type of measure. So either you do smart switches, you do microgrids, you do hardening the lines. We don't find it a standardized metric across the country, but depending on the location and the stakeholders and the resources available.
It seems that the planning is all about managing outages, but then at the end you talk about you're also going to do blue sky analysis. How does that fit in?
Scenario based. So tying potential scenario case studies with specific investments across the distribution grid. There's a lot of modeling that takes place within the process. So along with real world events that have occurred, using those as models, and also hypothetical situations. It's a combination of both.
So my question has to do with the tools and data. What kind of tools and data does the city need to have? And then what are the tools and processes that you bring? That was not clear, just the tools and data.
Sure.
Can you give us some examples of
Sure.
what a city would have to have and then what you all bring?
Sure. So historical data is very key. So looking at system performance over a period of historical parameters, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, that is the main piece of data that would be pulled from the utility or the city's system, their historic records. And as I said, that would include safety scores, that type of data. When we augment what the city may already have in place, we bring in comparable regional data. So if we're looking at a coastal area, we can bring in data from other coastal areas to kind of supplement what the city may have on their own.
And so then, do you put this all into a model? Is that what you're doing?
Yes.
That these are parameters into a model?
Correct. It's a software program that.
A couple of questions, Will. One is, the chart on the bottom of page 2 looks like it's taking steps towards economically valuing a microgrid. Is that something you're doing, or is anyone else doing? We all talk about what's the value of resilience, how much is a microgrid worth? The chart looks like it's taking steps in that direction.
Yes. With the city of New Orleans, I believe that could be the next phase. That taking the data that's come out of the phase 1 and phase 2, if the decision is to, say, select a microgrid solution and quantify the value of that tied to how it would support specific infrastructure services, that is a natural continuation of the model and continuation of this process.
Second question, how do you assess the ability of the microgrid to actually keep the lights on? For example, in the designs that we have, 13 designs, some are a ring bus with a single point of failure, and others have a score of automatic switches. So does all that switching add operational flexibility, or does it and complexity that's more likely to fail when the skies go dark. And what is it? How valuable is undergrounding? Is that subject to flooding?
You know, those are all considerations that can be incorporated into the model. Diving into that level, I'm probably going to need to defer you to Bobby Jeffers because he's the owner of the tool and really leads that. But from what you're describing, it's certainly within the capabilities of the tool.
I wonder if it can be scaled down to smaller rural communities.
Yes. Yes, it can.
Well, we had a question come in via the webinar. I think this has come up, but just to clarify, the question was, has the City of New Orleans or the municipal utility committed to fund any of the projects that were recommended in step 5 of the analysis, or that's still under consideration?
Still under consideration, as far as I'm aware. Nothing's been publicly announced as of yet.
So I'm not sure if I missed this or not. Will the tool eventually be made available for other cities to apply themselves, or do you need to work through Sandia to operate that tool?
Well, it is a tool that we are providing as a service. So with Los Alamos, we developed the tool. As far as I know, it must be managed through Sandia or one of our affiliates. It's not been offered independently of that.
Okay. So does that mean that it will be? Is it being designed to be used independently, or is it going to always be a service through Cindy and Los Alamos?
Well, I think that the service that we provide in terms of partnering with the city or the user of the framework is really a key value proposition that we're offering. Not only the data and tools that we're using to augment what the city might already have, but the data we're pulling in from other regions. So I think that operating it independently, you probably miss a key part of the value that we're offering through this.
I have another question. Yesterday, there was some talk that Sandia had come up with some actual numbers of what it would be to be resilient or not be resilient, of $150 per person.
SEMA.
SEMA was $150 per person per day, I believe, for 24 hours, and the low end of the estimate was $50.
Yeah, how does that tie into what you just presented? And where did that come from?
I can't speak to that. Is that something that you can speak to? I'm sorry, I can't speak to that.
I believe that SEMA number came from the benefit cost analysis methodology, which takes into account loss of life, injuries, and the difference between access to emergency services during an outage. So it's more geared towards that.
And that tool is online, has that tool available. You can look it up and you can actually contact them if you need more information about the sections, and we're happy to provide that information.
Yeah, we'll work on an email to send out to everyone afterwards, because I know we've mentioned several things that are online. We will make sure to get those in one place, so that is actually easy for you all to find them.
Is there a parallel effort with respect to flooding? Keeping the lights on under a flooded condition seems like not completely addressing the issue. There's a few feet of water.
Well, flooding was definitely part of the City of New Orleans framework and application. So again, that is something that can be incorporated.
Did you put, yeah, thanks. Did you put cost estimates to these different infrastructure improvement options that were provided in the recommendations? Okay. So those were provided to New Orleans?
Correct.
Okay. And so now the process is comparing that to the various benefits and resilience benefits.
Correct.
At this stage.
And that is proprietary information too.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Because there's definitely some really good points involved.
Okay, well, thank you again for the opportunity.
I actually have one more.
All right.
You're not done.
The other you could speak a little bit about how they were selected or sort of how they approached Sandia to join this project. Obviously, Puerto Rico and New Orleans had recent disasters within the last couple of decades with major hurricanes and flooding. Norfolk maybe not so much, although I know that they came to this project with their clean energy goals really in mind, wanting to adapt to climate change. So if you could talk a little bit about how cities came forward and sort of maybe differences in working with each city, particularly ones that had experienced a recent resilience event versus ones that have not.
I can speak to Puerto Rico because simultaneous to exercising this framework, we have been managing a number of demonstration projects in Puerto Rico, Microgrid demonstration project. My colleague Dan Borneo is directly involved in that. So I believe that the historical kind of origins of doing this comprehensive framework came out of the relationships that had been built through those demonstration projects. City of New Orleans, I believe, initiated the request to do this modeling and came to Sandia with the request after learning about it through various promotions that we have undertaken to alert cities of this available tool. I'm not sure about Norfolk, how that originated. We can certainly follow up and get the answer from Bobby.
So I just wanted to get up a little bit higher level because DOE resilience is something we want to address the department, and so we try to prioritize the location and the city based on the impact, the scale, and then we put resources for either a lab or multiple national labs to work together. So in case of like New Orleans, it's part of that because scale. So we under the grid modernization GMLC process, that is putting funding to allow Sandia and Los Alamos to support, and similar other places following that same process. Norfolk is a little bit different. Norfolk is, and now DOEs also have interest to work with not just the city, but the DOD facilities that are related to that area. And so Norfolk is one of the locations where we try to, support the critical infrastructure within the DOE, but also helping the community outside.
Thank you. Sure, can I add a comment? I'm Howard Fasal from Sandia, and I work with Will and Bobby. I think Norfolk was one of Rockefeller's 100 resilient cities, and I think that's where their original funding for engaging with Sandia came from. And also, these kinds of models, we generally try to give them away. We try to get them to a point where we can hand them off to commercial interests or other providers. So we're not trying to build a business model where we are the only purveyors of this kind of stuff. And we're trying to get it up to a point where we can hand it off to somebody else to implement it. So it's not our objective to constantly get between the cities and the model.
One more question you might have mentioned this, but aside from the model, are there reports about the work with the cities that you share?
Yes. There is a report both on Puerto Rico and New Orleans that I'd be happy to share.
Great. Thank you very much, Will.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you coming out, and I think at this point we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so I think let's move directly into Dan Ellis' presentation with NL, and then we'll hopefully get to our break a little before 10 o'clock. The clicker is over there.
All right, so I'm just advancing. Okay, good morning. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Dan Ellis. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'm here today to talk about a tool we've developed called REOPT. and I'm specifically going to talk about Reopt Lite, which is the online version of the tool. It's a web-based way to access it. So just a little background. So NREL is the National Renewable Energy Lab. We're part of the DOE complex, part of the family of laboratories in the Department of Energy. We are in Golden, Colorado. This is a bird's eye view of the campus. So we're kind of on the edge of Denver. The lab was established in the late 70s under Jimmy Carter during the oil crisis. So it was started out as the Solar Energy Research Institute, but the mandate is broadened to more generally renewable energy, energy efficiency. So we have colleagues that are working on kind of basic science, how to make solar more efficient, how to turn biomass into fuels. We also have a whole group of expertise on kind of building science, so energy efficiency work. And then, of course, we've got kind of teams of really smart people that do work on the kind of large integration questions. How does the grid evolve to accommodate the kind of utility of the future, these high penetration scenarios? So what I'm going to talk about today, as I mentioned, is the Reopt Lite tool. So for those in the utility space, Reopt Lite is essentially kind of a capacity expansion model for behind the meter. So it's a customer-centric tool that helps kind of answer these questions about what is the value proposition of distributed energy resources that I may, as a facility owner, be interested in considering for my site, whether it's solar, battery, wind systems. And so, you know, these can be kind of complex questions. It can depend on the strength of the resource, what the cost of your money may be, what the maintenance costs are versus the first costs, what the utility costs are in an area, what the shape of the utility power needs are at the site versus what the shape is of the solar resource at the site. And so these can be kind of complex questions. And so we formulated this model really because we were getting pretty interesting questions from some of our federal stakeholders, specifically Department of Defense. You know, they've got lots of large installations spread out throughout the continental U.S. and the globe, actually, and they had renewable energy goals and energy efficiency goals, and they have high operation costs. You know, they're one of the largest consumers of utility electricity, and so they came to us asking questions. You know, we have some limited resources in terms of staff and maybe money to invest. Where should we think about investing in renewable energy? Where should we think about putting in energy storage systems? And so we developed this model where we can help them answer those questions and kind of prioritize where they should spend their efforts. And so this is kind of a complex picture, but what we're trying to show is that there's a number of potential options at a site, and you know, typically, is there a pointer? Oh yeah, is that it? Yeah. So you know, typically the site is procuring their electricity from the local utility, and they're paying some kind of cost for that. They've got some goals, perhaps, that might be driven by renewable energy goals, or the goals might be more just, can we reduce operating costs? They've got an electrical load profile, which is going to be very site-specific. You know, there's going to be weekend and weekend variations. There might be seasonal differences, and then there's kind of options to consider as alternatives to the electric grid. So what we're not modeling here typically is no grid. We're assuming they have the opportunity to continue to procure power from the grid at whatever their rate structure is, but they're interested in supplementing some of that power with some alternative resources. And so currently on the Lite tool, the online tool, we have solar photovoltaics, wind, and energy storage. And then we'll talk about today is we recently added a diesel generator as a backup resource. And then we're working on, with funding from the Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office, integrating in a combined heat and power module, which will roll out in the next year. So currently the diesel generator model is really just a backup generator. So it's there for if the grid goes out, but we'll be integrating in a dispatchable resource this year as a combined heat and power module. So that would be able to operate parallel to the utility and may have value resiliency benefits as well as kind of economic benefits when there's not an outage to reduce the cost of electricity. So, these are kind of the inputs. We need the site's load. We need to understand the kind of characterization of these resources. When we talk about the electricity grid, it's very much what the rate tariff is, and as you all know, those can be quite complex. And then there's kind of the economic considerations, kind of the cost of money. What do we think the utility cost escalation rates might be? What's the general inflation rate? And then what the model does is kind of spit out a solution. And again, you're all well aware of capacity expansion models and economic dispatch models. That's essentially what this is, shrunken down to a very small scale. So you get the model considers the technologies, and the model will tell you which technologies appear to be cost effective, how big those should be, and then you can review the operation of those assets. It's determining the dispatch simultaneously to wring out the maximum economic value, and then it spits out kind of the general economics of the scenario for the facility owner. So the tool has been available online for only a couple of years now, about 2.5 years. We're finding that we don't really know precisely. You're not required to register to use the tool. You can create an account if you want to save work. If you're going to build kind of a custom rate tariff, you can save it on there if you create an account. But generally, we're not sure of all the uses out there, but we do have a help email, and so we get some sense of who's using it. And really, I think the primary users we find are those facility owners who are just kind of curious about what the economic potential is of these systems. We've also know that there's certain developers who are using it to help kind of explain the value proposition or explore the value proposition. We've had a couple utilities that we know are using it. And then there's researchers, obviously. The tool is accessible not only through a web-based interface, but through an API. So you can do like a programmatical interface and do kind of larger scale studies instead of one at a time. We've had researchers within the laboratory who have looked at trying to understand nationally where do energy storage systems seem to be cost effective. So through the API, they've been able to access the utility rate database, so they can pull in utility rate databases automatically, put in some default costs, and run some kind of standardized Department of Energy reference buildings throughout the country and see where the economics look like they're promising, or what cost points would you have to hit on the distributed energy resources when you start to see cost effectiveness. So this is kind of a general sense of who's using it. And then I suppose, others could be doing kind of a policy research question, what type of cost structure or incentives might be required to make systems cost effective that may also provide kind of a resiliency benefit. And of course, we're here to talk about the resiliency point. So within the model, this is kind of a general picture of what the web page looks like. It's impossible to see from back here. My apologies. If you just Google REOPT or REOPT Lite, you'll kind of get to this landing page here. What we typically have there's two modes of operation. One is what we just call the financial mode, and one's what we call the resiliency mode. Both of them rely on the same formulation. It's just in the resiliency mode, the utility customer, can go in there and simulate a power outage. So the grid as a resource is off for a period of time, and the model considers that when it's sizing the assets. So those are the kind of the two modes. If you run the model, what you generally get out of it, as I previously described, is kind of the size of the technologies, the general economics of it, and then there's kind of a base case, and then the investment case scenarios where you can kind of see the before and the after, both on the kind of the technology sizes, how much electricity you're procuring from utility, how your utility costs change kind of before and after the investment. So it's a life cycle economic tool. So, you know, we have defaults for costs. We have a default analysis period, but the user can go in and adjust all those. And so the level of expertise required to access the tool is quite low. You can just start with all these defaults. However, you know, garbage in, garbage out obviously applies. So we've tried to default to reasonable values, say for costs on the national average, but costs obviously are going to be very site specific. And so what we say is, what I say is, you know, this isn't telling you what you should do. Obviously, this doesn't tell you, okay, this particular site should go out and buy this system. This just kind of gives you a sense of what the opportunities may be at your site. Might make you an informed consumer as you go out and start to get requests, start to get quotations, or start to talk to developers. So in addition to the kind of size of the systems, you know, i.e. the general architecture and the economics of it, you get this hourly dispatch that you can scroll through. There's some nifty little bars you can scroll back and forth. You can see what the solar resource is, what the state of charge of the battery is in the model as it's kind of trying to figure out what the most economic dispatch is. So about 5 or 6 months ago, we added this outage scenario. So I'll just talk about that in a little more detail, just to show you what it's doing, and then we could talk a little bit about what it's doing and what it's not doing, just to be clear. And I wanted to point out that recently I mentioned there's the API method of accessing it, but just this month we added this. We've gone to an open source version of the tool. I haven't worked on that. I don't really know how all that's going to work. It's kind of, but you know, as our colleagues at Sandia said, the goal is to get these tools out there. You know, we are funded through federal dollars, so we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. So we're doing REOP generally is a tool that requires expert user. It's complex. We can do more complex analyses, but we're trying to make it more accessible through the REOP Lite web-based version, and now we're rolling out. We've just rolled out this open source version too, so we're hoping that others can add to it. Okay, so in the resiliency analysis, as I mentioned, it's very similar to the financial analysis. So the user can go in there and they can select, I want to do a strictly financial analysis. I'm not really concerned about grid outages. I just want to know, is solar cost advantageous, or should I think about adding a battery to my behind the meter to see if I can reduce my utility costs? Or you can do the resiliency analysis. If you click the resiliency analysis, what you just get, kind of see the shakes here. I'm going to try to stabilize on the table here. You get this additional drop down, which is the resiliency, and we'll show that in a little more detail. But it's pretty simple inputs. One of the key inputs is kind of where you are in the world. So the address is important. That tells the model what solar resource that you capture, what wind resource that you capture, and it also filters down in the utility rate database regionally, where the user can go in there and try to find their rate tariff. The utility rate database is I think also Department of Energy funded. It's our best attempt at kind of getting at the national level a collection of all the rates in one place. It's, you know, user beware. You should review the tariff. As you all know, tariffs are very complex. There's very rarely one size fits all, but this is a general kind of capture of the high level time of use rates, how they vary versus the time of day and season, as well as demand charges. Those are all kind of captured here. Okay, charge forward. Okay, so from, in addition to those kind of standard inputs of, okay, this is my site load, this is what my utility rates are, this is where I am. These are kind of, as I mentioned, we have all these default costs for the technologies, but if you're going to do the resiliency analysis, what you're doing is just kind of turning off the grid as a source of power within the model, where the model is constrained. We have a constraint within the model that says you must meet the load in every hour. If the utility isn't there, it's just an optional. The technology is no longer available during those time steps. So the model is trying to figure out, well, how else are we going to meet the load? And so the user can go in there and just simplistically apply a rule of thumb that says, well, my critical load might be 50% or 10% or 100% of my normal load during that outage. And so that's kind of a user input. Or the user could upload, if they had done a site assessment where they really did kind of meter and figure out what their critical loads are, they can upload that as well. And then, Sandia folks mentioned the SAIDI and safety metrics. We kind of had lots of discussions internally, like how are we going to, how are we going to try to model this? Are we just going to do kind of statistical analysis? And where we are now is we just kind of rely on the user to go in there and say, okay, I'm interested in modeling an outage, and they can put in there it's going to be some hours or days. They can pick a time when it might start. So you might be looking at, it's really kind of a user question. Do you think it's going to be like a winter storm event, and do you think the worst case is a February storm, or is it going to be in the summer when the local grid is really stressed with maybe air conditioning loads? So and currently those are user inputs. There's kind of some ways to access. The model can help you decide. It can look at, well, when do you think your peak loads is? Maybe I want to model that. You can click on these buttons to load that in there. And so you have to kind of specify the critical load levels, when the outage may occur. We have some help features in there to help you kind of look at your load and figure out, well, what do you think the worst case scenario is, and then when you think it's going to start. And these are kind of the must meet kind of loads. Okay. Yeah, feel free to interrupt if there's something I'm saying that.
I really. So normally to do economic dispatch, it takes a system approach. So you look at the load and look at all the supplies, and you go your programming. But it sounds like you are developing this tool from a customer perspective as an individual. I don't know how that works in terms of dispatch. You have hourly dispatch that you can actually do on web. It's kind of counterintuitive, because we, the state, just hired a consultant to do 80 by 50, well, net zero, whatever you call it, for GHG emissions reduction. And for their daily dispatch modeling, it takes 13 days to run that model.
Yeah.
So I wonder what is your
yeah, good question. Yeah, so the formulation of this model is a mixed integer linear program, so it is an optimization model. The scale of what we're doing, though, is as I said, it's a single facility. So when I talk about the economic dispatch model, it's really behind the meter. And so the search space, the decisions the model has to make is much more limited than a full state kind of economic dispatch or a utility economic dispatch. It really is, the dispatch for this model is just for the customer's load, say for this hotel, am I going to source power from the utility, or am I going to source it from a rooftop solar system, or the battery energy system I may have in the basement, or the CHP system that we're going to be adding to the model? Where am I going to source these energy sources from? So it's a dispatch within the facility that we're looking at.
Okay, so you only need your own load.
Yeah, and it's a cost minimization function. So when it's deciding where it's going to source the energy from, it's looking at what the marginal costs are for the power in each time step, as well as the investment costs needed to procure.
Can it go beyond just one
Yeah.
We're talking about microgrid, so maybe a few facilities with that.
Yeah, so the scenario we've got here is kind of a behind the meter scenario. So a campus could use this if they've got kind of a single utility connection in multiple buildings. They'd kind of collate their loads, collect their loads into a single input into this model. Certainly our React desktop model, which is kind of more the expert users, we've done kind of islands where we're modeling. There is not a grid supplier. There's a utility that's burning diesel fuel, for example. We've done some remote communities in Alaska, but we're not talking about the utilities perspective here. It's really a customer behind the meter perspective. Okay, so on the front page of the inputs section of the model, the user can select the technologies of interest. Right now, as I mentioned, we've got PV, battery, and wind power, and we've got this backup generator button now that we've had the resiliency. What you see if you expand the individual technologies are kind of the cost inputs, and we default to these. What's the cost of the technology? Are there any incentives available? So we try to capture, we're US centric, so we got kind of the investment tax credit, the modified accelerated cost recovery, depreciation schedules here. We've got maintenance costs. So we do have defaults for all those. The user can go in there and run this pretty quickly. But again, a lot of these costs will be dependent on the site, and maybe if you're starting to get quotes or you're starting to work with, if you're a developer yourself, you put in your own cost there. The generator, again, currently it's a backup generator. When we add CHP, it won't be strictly used for those outage scenarios, but there's some cost there. The user can select whether or not they already have a backup generator or not. If you have a generator, the model will just use it. It won't cost it. But if you don't have a generator, the model will help size the backup generator. And then there's obviously cost for the fuel and the maintenance cost for the generator that we want to capture in the life cycle cost characteristics, as well as some understanding, well, what is the kind of efficiency of that unit in terms of gallons required per kilowatt hour generated. What you get on the outputs, so you get, as I pointed out previously, you get the size of the technologies. Here you can see we've added a generator, and then you kind of get the no investment case, and then the economics of the investment case. In this scenario, the investment is life cycle cost effective because in the scenario I modeled, it's a place it's California where there's high demand charges, there's high time of use charges, and so the model has looked at, well, how much PV, how much battery, how much generator, what are the economics of it. In the dispatch, you kind of see this blue area shows where the grid goes out, and you can see how that load was met during that period. What I want to point out here is it's a mixed integer linear program, and so the search spaces are continuous. You can see that, okay, the size is 389 kilowatts of solar. It's telling me the battery should have this kind of combination of power and energy that looks approximately to be like a 4-hour battery, but you're telling me it's a 96 kilowatt. That's because it's a continuous space. The user could go in there and rerun this and then start to kind of round these up to sizes that are maybe can be procured, or what the supplier that they're working with has. So this is just kind of a first pass to show you about the scale of systems you'll need. And additionally, like an 18 kilowatt piece of generator, you can see it's a modest size unit, and you're probably not going to be able to buy a unit that's 18 kilowatts. So it just kind of shows you just the general sizing of each. And then let's be clear, this 18 kilowatt generator was sized only to support you through the outage that you modeled. It doesn't meet your peak loads if your outage would occur another time. So let's just kind of give you a sense of what the model's doing and perhaps some of the limitations of it. In addition, when we're doing the resiliency analysis, we're kind of simultaneously doing the what we call the financial analysis, so the no outage scenario. So you can kind of side by side see how the system architecture may differ if you're trying to design a system that can help you in this kind of microgrid scenario, as well as the incremental costs and benefits of that. In this case, to me, it's interesting, and again, sorry you can't see the numbers. The investment costs obviously went up because the size of the battery increased, the size of the PV system increased slightly, and then we had to buy a diesel generator, so the capital costs went up. But perhaps we'll share these slides with you. What you would see at the bottom is that the net present values didn't go down by the investment size, because some of the incremental investment you made for the solar and battery has value to you when there is not an outage. So you're getting some additional value recovered. So you might be spending another couple $100,000 more for the assets, but on the life cycle cost basis, your net present value doesn't go down an equivalent amount necessarily.
Quick question.
Yes.
About diesel generators. Why? California Air Resources Board in no way wants you to put in a diesel generator. And just looking at, a lot of us are looking at resilience as well as clean energy goals.
Yep.
And so I wonder how hard it would be to even just model a propane backup generator. Most of them have natural gas, which isn't carbon free. I understand that. But, and what about other types of batteries? This is only lithium ion, right?
This is a generic battery. You know, it's just kind of an energy storage bucket that has a leak. You know, it doesn't have a perfect efficiency. Our default costs are about lithium ion. The efficiency is about lithium ion, but the user could change those. In terms of why backup generator might be diesel, firstly, I should say that the user doesn't have to select a backup generator. They could say, I want to look at a resiliency scenario where I don't put in a backup generator. I just want to look at solar and battery. I would just be cautious in interpreting the results here because, you know, again, we're not modeling every possible scenario. We don't have correlation between an actual outage event and the solar resource. We're kind of modeling a typical meteorological year solar resource. So there might be times where that outage could be a result of a severe storm where your solar might be covered in snow or it might be really cloudy. And so there might be kind of correlations there that the model doesn't understand. And well, where we're not capturing is kind of the statistical probability that these may be available or not available during an outage. So the user doesn't have to include the generator. They can change the costs, the maintenance costs, the fuel costs, and the efficiency of it can be a propane or a natural gas. I'll just put in a plug here that a colleague and I wrote a paper this last year where we looked at it's called comparison of fuel choice on generator types, and we looked at natural gas versus diesel. It's kind of a challenging question because the reliability of the backup gas system is kind of difficult to assess. We don't have a lot of data there, but we did our best to do that assessment. So if you wanted to look at a natural gas generator instead of a diesel, you could put those in here, or if you didn't want to look at a generator at all, you would exclude it. Okay. So in addition, so part of the outputs too, as I mentioned, you know, the model must meet that outage that you simulate. And so it says, you know, we met that outage, but additionally it does some math and it says, okay, in this scenario, I did a 2-day outage. It runs that 2-day outage for every hour of the year. And it looks at, well, what's the probability of me meeting that 2-day outage if it happened at other times that I didn't select? In this case, it says it could meet 83% of those. There's some kind of interactive plots you can play with here. It's difficult to interpret, but this is kind of the monthly by month how we determine this 83%. So you can see what this is kind of on the left axis is the probability of meeting the load as a function of outage time on this axis here. So you can see there's some months where we're not doing so well. I suspect it has to do with the fact that maybe the loads were high in that month and the solar resource was poor, and the generator didn't have enough fuel to go a full 2 days. But then some months, you know, it does quite well. So that's, you know, another kind of important question here is if you're gonna build a resilient system for your facility or campus, obviously the costs are going to be more than the costs of the parts. Right, there's going to be kind of a supervisory controller. There might be some switchgear and wiring changes you have to make sure that your resiliency loads are connected to the backup system that you've installed. We have made no attempt to cost those here, but we put these sliders in to allow the user to play with it so they can kind of look at like, well, how do the economics change if I have to make these incremental investments, and you see these net present value bars moving up and down. Also, as I mentioned, the objective of the model is to minimize costs. What we haven't explicitly put in here is the cost of the outage to the site. What I found is that it's difficult to get an answer on that. What does an outage cost somebody? I don't think necessarily they know. We've done analysis for clients who could tell us a number when we cost the outage, but typically what we hear is, well, we just can't tolerate it. And so it's really what do we need to put in to survive the outage, not how much pain am I willing to suffer as a decision within the model. But if you wanted to play with that, and there's also a slider there, what is the outage costs? When you can see, okay, my net present value is going to go up because I'm no longer going to suffer these outages here. Okay, so the results, as I said, I think it's an optimization. You know, it's an optimization. I think the formulation is powerful. It helps kind of answer these very complex questions. But as I mentioned, there's limitations to this type of model. Firstly, as I said, the accessibility tool is simple. You can just go in there and start kind of running these example cases, and if you don't have your hourly profile, you can use the commercial reference building. Say, oh, I've got a building in Washington, D.C., and it'll kind of shape that hourly load for you based on what your bills are saying are your totals. So you can run them all quickly, but there's lots of assumptions in there, and without kind of checking the assumptions, you could get results that garbage in, garbage out. And the other limitation, and this is important to understand, is that the model has perfect knowledge, right? It's solving that dispatch and the economics over the full year. It knows what your loads are going to be tomorrow. It knows what your loads are going to be 3 months from now. So it has perfect forecast in that sense. It knows what the solar resource is going to be, and it even knows when that outage is going to occur. So what you get out of this model is what I would call the best bound. It kind of says, like, this is the best case scenario. These are the best economics. And again, that's a reason why I would say that the model doesn't tell you what you should buy. It just kind of helps you inform you of like what the trade space is, what technology should I consider when you're. So for a user, I think it's educational. For a developer, they can maybe couch like the model. Obviously, the cost effectiveness of the battery is often kind of in that peak shaving mode where it anticipates the peak. Here, the model knows when that peak's going to happen, and it can shave it with perfect efficiency. But a developer who's going to sell you about a battery shaving would have to kind of tell you, well, what's the probability that they'll be able to hit the event in any month. Okay. So I believe that's one of my last slides. No, it isn't. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, we are going to add CHP here this year. We're going to add some kind of what we call third-party financing model. Right now, it's really the perspective of the facility owner, where it's their money to bring in the scenario. What we want to do is allow kind of the model to consider kind of two costs of money. You got a developer who maybe has a return on investment motive, and then you got the off-taker who may be willing to pay for some energy services agreement. So we want to be able to model that. A lot of this work was done through the support of the Department of Energy's Federal Energy Management Program. So they are our primary kind of customer, and so they've got some defaults they want us to do for the feds that we're going to put in there. As I mentioned, we have the utility rate database. We access it, but we want to add additional charges that we typically see, which are like peak load contributions. There's kind of these ratchet lookbacks where the demand charge isn't necessarily specific to that month, but it might be based on, say, 70% of the last 6 months or something. So we're going to be adding some additional fidelity there. I want to point out that there's some YouTube tutorials, which I find they're pretty good, I gotta say. They'll help you understand kind of what's going on in the rate schedule. Again, you can go into the rate database and you can download it, but you can build your own. It's pretty well designed, but you could look at the YouTube channel if you have any questions that I can't answer right now.
To the previous slide.
Sure.
We will be sending these out.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so question, you
this is distributed wind that you might put on, so, you know, urban wind that generally you don't see, right? It's difficult resource. But if you were trying to do more of a campus scenario, again, this would be kind of behind the meter. So we do allow access to some of the larger scale wind turbines, say for a site that's remote and it's got a hill and they've got a good access to the resource. So what we're, the resources that we're accessing are for this, for the solar, it's the ZenRel, the resource database. The wind is kind of a wind toolkit. So it's not, wind data can be difficult to come by. There's lots of proprietary data sets, but NREL does have this wind toolkit where you can get like approximately 5 years of resource data that we use in the model. But there's obviously very site-specific impacts that site-specific features that could impact the wind resource, whether there's a building in the way or a hill, whether you're in a valley or on top of the hill. So it's a regional wind resource, but yeah, it's.
Is that at a certain altitude, the wind speed data?
I believe it comes in at multiple levels, elevations, and then the model tries to interpolate to match the turbine size that goes with the loads.
Sure. And then you mentioned there's a tool that estimates the probability of meeting a 48-hour outage. Are there other durations that you can use the tool to measure probability of meeting?
Yeah, this is a user input. So when I ran the defaults, if you go in here, you can run like load an example scenario. It'll load a building in California, and it'll have all that stuff in there where you kind of see where a lot of the default settings are. The default setting for there was a 2-day outage, but the user could go and say, I want to do a half a day, or I want to assume I've got no grid and I'm going to do a full year. You know, so that's a user input. Yeah.
So what types of disasters do you have that one line that is an input? I guess it's a drop-down kind of thing. So what do you input?
Yeah, so we're not trying to model the probability that the outage is going to occur. We're not looking at the grid reliability regionally or nationally. That's a user input, so we're not specifically looking for fires in California or nor'easters in New England. It's just a user input says, I want to look at an outage that may last this duration. Mike?
Did fuel cells price themselves out of this model?
No, it didn't. So when we add the combined heat and power, for combined heat and power, we're going to have multiple prime movers that you can select. We're going to have reciprocating engines. We're going to have combustion turbines, microturbines, and fuel cell. I don't know when you run the tool with our default costs if a fuel cell is going to win or lose against those other prime movers, but the user can look at kind of what each of those prime movers has its own characteristics. Again, it's not available yet, but it will be part of the rollout this year. There's different kind of thermal efficiencies, the different levels of waste heat that come out of those different prime movers, and capital costs and maintenance costs. So the user could compare different types of assets if they're going to include a combined heat and power system. You know, it's going to add considerable complexity because then, you know, in addition to the electrical loads, you're going to have your site thermal loads. The prime movers have these efficiencies, which are a function of how they're loaded. We're going to try to capture that. We're also been asked to include, in addition to a heating load, we've been asked to include a cooling load because you might have a prime mover that has lots of waste heat in the summer, and so you might want to use some of that steam to drive a thermal absorption chiller. So it's going to become a bit more complex. I'm a little concerned about the solve times right now. If you go in here and you run it, it could take, you know, you mentioned it takes a half a day or something to solve, days to solve Massachusetts. Yeah. So that's kind of the concern with online optimization is the solve time. So if it's, you don't necessarily know. Here, you know, these might take 30 seconds or something. It's not bad. I'm nervous about when we add CHP in there what's going to happen. You know, are we going to have to email you the solution? But we will have those additional prime movers.
You kind of alluded to this with your answer to Mary's question, but New England is seeing more snowstorms when there's in the fall when the leaves are still on the trees. And so because you can plug in the outage dates, what are the assumptions that go into what season the model includes?
Okay, so good question. So we are modeling like every hour of the year. So the load data we're asking for is hourly, and it's usually accessible. You know, the utility can usually provide that. If the user doesn't have that, you know, we can help shape it using the DOE commercial reference buildings. The solar resource and the wind resource we are modeling hourly, and so depending on where the user puts that outage, your answer might change, right? So if you do a fall, if you say I want to model 2 days in the fall, maybe the solar resource is diminished, and you'll get a different answer than if you do it in the spring or summer. And again, as I mentioned, the solar resource, what we're calling here is NREL's PV Watts tool to model the solar system. And so what that's relying on is a typical meteorological year. So again, when you're doing your outage analyses, you know, a lot of those are kind of weather events are extreme events. Your typical meteorological year isn't going to capture those extreme conditions.
Is a typical meteorological year based on historic reference, or is it projecting?
Yeah, another good question. So the typical meteorological year is it's based on historical weather at a given weather station, and it can be 40 years of kind of weather data. And then the develop the typical is they try to find a typical month. So they try to find the mean month of February, which kind of where the resource and the weather looks like it fell within the mean of those 40 years. So we're not projecting climate change impacts within those. And I haven't seen any work on that, actually. That would be a good question. But.
All right, seeing no other questions, and we are right at 10 o'clock, so that's on schedule on our agenda. So we'll take a 15-minute break. When we come back, we'll go into EPA's presentation and technique.
And there's coffee and some snacks back here. Again, the restrooms, if you head out this door, take a right.
I'm glad we met.
I know. Another right.
And I'm so glad you laid out, I mean, I was going to reach out to you. Part of our challenges is we were funding more ads. There was funding, but we're running contractual issues about getting the funding. So we're just our challenge is we can from our not in both at the both field, market scale. I think it comes down to
oh, yes. Okay.
so I am so excited. Everything I'm looking to that feedback partnership team and the API just last year in Japan and compared to how much
I don't know enough, but we don't know all the stuff that we get to. Microgrids or
but it sounds like you're doing at the facility scale, right? Kind of looking at the facility level. Oh.
The data that is actually what is the data that's monitoring and the rest of it.
Also, 600 megawatts of storage in the field by the end of next year.
Yeah.
That would be a good.
As I'm putting my
you after, after like.
Certainly, practicing resilience, because I am, based on my
This conversation.
they're looking to see what our tools
The legislature threw these goals over the fence, the governor signed it, and ran it up to us.
Yeah,
a lot of them, all of them, and if you are working that has the terminological knowledge, that's the other clear for the audience. You don't need as much organization. I don't think that the knowledge of that cannot afford to be in their hospitals. So they don't even have a sense of potential that is possible. So can we start off with our tool? Turn the audience over to and right, but then super not again, and we also can come up with mitigation on that, right? So
That sounds great, yeah.
I think that's my last year of presentation.
Welcome, your help.
That's great. Well, we'll start.
Great. Actually, we probably work with John Hagan. They have worked with John. We put together.
Oh, yes, I seen it on the webinar, my colleague Emma presented, and I saw the haven't read it.
I don't know if this I don't know this out yet.
I thought I found it on the webpage, but I haven't read it.
Great. I'll probably mention after next.
That's a picture of that?
Yeah. I think you can.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, you can email it to you in your card. Sure. I'll find out if there's a question about review.
So which office are you in?
The energy program.
Okay.
Weather station.
I'm actually going to put out right now.
Oh, great.
So I think it's worth it.
Something
I guess or something.
Yeah, Emma presented, there was a webinar a week ago.
Yeah. There may be a
or at least the level of political pullback would be tolerable.
I work with them on identifying.
Those are the wild cards. Those are
They're interested in seeing if the thing is but they have some clear form of funding.
Well, that could be like the user could see if I efficiency work and I change the load. So
yeah, right.
we don't have the ability. This is all like energy conservation measure versus
right.
This. And that'd be cool to see. We've done actually that kind of thing in our desktop model, where instead of like investing in ways to meet the load, this investment that could reduce my load this way make better sense. So,
I mean, I thought energy efficiency.
So we don't specifically have it in React Lite, but hey, well, if I'm able to reduce my load and rerun it, but we're not costing.
Yeah, I mean,
Jim is my boss. He's consumed with the 7.5.
Yeah, I saw that bar chart. I think this might have been referenced.
So that's an elephant. And everything else is like either secondary.
I'll get you a business card.
Yeah, that would be nice.
All the TCUs are overworked.
Squeeze here. So I don't know. It'll come out new. I think I might see that connection already that. Well, I own the store, so I can.
So you're presenting that now.
Jim, like that now.
Yes. And, I mean, compared to yours,
I don't know.
Meat gold, period. Meat gold.
Yeah?
When they,
It's kind of fun, I think, to play with.
No, but I wasn't here yesterday. I was in storage.
But a 700-car freight train full of rocks, it's driving up the hill. Heard about it. Well, we don't have any hills, so. Or even, summertime,
I didn't know the FBI.
you call on kids like ski. I love residents.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
We have one top hydro plant in the state now, so it's 120 megawatts, 90% of all the storage in the state. Upgrade that. But I think if they put in a new transformer, they could upgrade it by how much, I don't know, but some model like they're saying. Yeah, those are the wild cards. Here's your lucky line. Right now, this is great. Thank you. I'll send you. Yeah, but it would be, like you said, check your spots about it. I won't go.
And that might be why
in many different areas. So that's one of the.
Well, I will have that.
That's not pretty. So, and that happens right.
Santia model publicly the Santia model publicly available on the website.
Well, white papers that are specific to applications are
Got it.
available.
But not,
It's really interesting. I'll just read up on your.
like,
But you know, we could certainly do a tutorial or something. If you contact either myself or Bob.
yeah. No, I wanted to just
Both of us?
she wants the Office of Community Revitalization. They do a lot of like systems modeling, and they so far have different energy, which is like I just want to make sure you guys can.
Oh, you did. Definitely that.
Yeah, we're close. Yeah, so we have two candidates. Untitled. and there's one closer to Boulder.
We follow up and get calls.
International. Where the launch winds are.
Yeah.
Work up there. Nice to meet you. Boulder. 30 minutes drive.
Really? Okay.
It's just up the. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Reach out to me. Reach me.
Thank you so much. What's your last name?
Maisley.
Maisley?
M-A-D.
M-A-D-E-Y.
Let me, I have a black.
Okay, thank you.
Are you in DC?
I'm Michelle Benway.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to meet them.
Yeah. So I work in the Office of Community Revitalization. We've been the main Office of Community, but we're kind of those programs, a lot of community development.
Oh, really?
Working mostly with local government, but it's also across federal partners. So, but energy is in London. We're uncharted territory.
Oh. What's the type typically? What would be a typical type of system?
Just planning. It's sort of, I think of it more as like capacity building. That's typically the audience that we expected, where we don't have the same level of resources, planning capabilities. More rural, small towns, cities. In this field of resilience planning, there's a little bit of a different audience, sort of regional scale. That's the audience we're working with, collaboration with FEMA. And yeah, making time for those like bigger picture, deeper conversations around planning that everybody has their planning requirements that they have to meet, but how to make it work. So integrating across plans and doing some more like
So you say you do it with FEMA?
Well, in this, what we'll be presenting about today is a resilience toolkit with FEMA, but we have a number of other programs that are in partnership with other agencies or just community-based. So one of the other programs that I've worked on is called Local Food, Local Spaces. That's more about the local fiber and thinking about how that can also be a way of revitalizing and reinvigorating a big downtown Main Street revitalization. Going with their infrastructure, existing infrastructure, and some of these small towns, how to like bring that life back to their environmental things.
Everyone, we're going to get started again. If you can take
Good question. Not specifically. But yeah, some of our partners, the CDC partners with and they're interested in their physical activity and
So I'm going to come back here so that I can be heard over the phone a little more clearly, but as we come back, I just wanted to remind everyone of our agenda today. So we have presentations remaining from the EPA, We're joined by two staff in person, and I think, was Abby going to call in?
Yeah,
Okay. And Nicholas DeForest with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. He will also be via webinar, but we have a colleague from the Department of Energy, ERE, Greg, here in person with us. And I know also most of those in the room, except for the speakers, some of the speakers were with us yesterday for day one of this discussion. So really where all these presentations fit and where we hope that they're useful to our state members is answering some of the questions that came up yesterday about trying to value the resilience and other benefits of microgrids, figuring out how to size and site microgrids. So we hope that these are good tools for you all and something that you can take back and share with your colleagues in your states. Let's go into EPAs. I'll see if I can get Abby up on the webinar. Okay, great. Thank you.
I can go ahead. I just want to make sure. Okay, yeah. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Niharika Nightingale. I work at the EPA CHP Partnership Program, and I also have with me two colleagues from another program at EPA. They work in the Office of Community Revitalization. As Gia mentioned, Michelle is right there, and Abby is calling in, and she'll be involved in the discussion. So our presentation is going to be twofold. One is going to start off more along what I would call like a more technology-based focus, then moving more towards a kind of systems-based focus. So just to kind of give you an idea about, there we go. Okay. Just to kind of give you a quick a snapshot about the CHP partnership, EPA has several programs on clean energy. The one I think that's extremely well known is Energy Star. This program on CHP was started around 2001. And I would say since its inception, there has been an element of it that has had focused since that time on reliability. So a lot of our audience is really broad. You know, we have end users, we have developers, we have some utilities, more gas and muni utilities, state and city local agencies, and then NGOs and industry associations who engage with us, right? And in that way, we're a little different from other kind of programs that are there. And part of it is just the complexity of CHP that Dan pointed out. Dan referred to something called prime mover, which is basically there are certain technologies that allow you to capture waste heat when power is being generated. Those are referred to as prime movers, and they can then be kind of coupled with what we call a heat recovery unit, which captures that waste heat. And you can use a bunch of different fuels. You could use natural gas. You can also use biomass. You can use other fuels too, right? And because of that, we have this very diverse kind of audience base out there. And for that reason too, a lot of our tools have been educational in based. Just because people, depending on where you are on the spectrum of understanding CHP, are completely lost from the time the acronym starts to having are very conversant with CHP and know quite how to use it for resiliency. In that there were some flyers that were handed out that kind of give you a snapshot about it. So I'm not going to belabor the point about what kind of work we do. But I would say that since that time in 2001, when our tools started focusing on reliability, and at that time there wasn't also that much distinction given about reliability and resiliency, to 2013 when Sandy happened, when a lot of interest kind of really took place in that understanding CHP. And we ended up collaborating with HUD and DOE at that time. HUD received a lot of requests saying, can you educate us better on CHP? Because we're hearing a lot about CHPs that were up and running in Manhattan, and that kind of ended up being islanded from the grid, ended up being a shelter in place. And can you just give us more information? So HUD reached out to us. We worked with them and DOE to kind of put out a tool at that time. And around the same time, NYSERDA ran a solicitation that was very much resiliency focused and CHP focused. And that catalog then was then kind of embraced by DOE in their whole Resiliency Accelerator. So they actually have now taken that NYSERDA-based catalog on CHP and turned it into a national kind of catalog. And I'd be happy to connect folks if they'd like to folks at DOE that run that. The other thing that we've continued to do was to kind of shine the light on systems that performed really well. And most of them, as we started learning too, are more systems-based, right? They could be microgrid-based, they could be campus-based. So there were certain systems we recognized, such as UC San Diego, that has been doing just a phenomenal job in integrating renewables, being in an area that is severe ozone non-attainment and meeting air standards, and continue to meet the needs of their campus. Princeton University has done an incredible job out in New Jersey. And then hospitals out in Texas that have done a really great job during Katrina and other times where they've had put in a CHP system, but that was also connected to other systems. And the bottom line, I guess, for all of these is cost, right? I mean, there was a question that was raised about diesel generators, right? In some areas of the country, depending on where you are, some people are still saying that is the most cost-effective solution. We want to do battery storage, but perhaps we're going to do CHP right now until we can switch to battery storage, right? And I've seen two examples, one at a microgrid in Maryland that did the same thing, and then also seen it at a farmer campus. And then the last one that was touched on briefly, the military is doing a lot of interesting stuff around microgrids and resiliency. So we recognize a system out in California that's at the end of a grid and has just been doing this very innovative kind of system-based integration of CHP and battery and solar and based on what their needs are. And so in our case, what we've also done is kind of looked at existing tools we have. And this interest started around that 2013, 2014 frame to better understand what does resiliency mean, what role can we play, recognizing ours are primarily educational tools. And fortunately for us, NREL decided to take REOPT and turn it into REOPT Lite and kind of come up with a tool that's helpful. And I'm so glad you went before me to explain the complexity of putting in CHP within it. But what we did do, and again, this is that we have a tool that is very much looks at emissions. And we took that tool and actually applied it to a case study in Milford, Connecticut. Now, post-Sandy, Connecticut put out several solicitations looking at microgrids in particular being used for community resiliency. And City of Milford was one such system that was developed that received a grant. And what we did is we knew what the components of it was, that they were going to be integrating PV and CHP. And at that time, what we said is like, let's take a look at our tool and see if there's like a very kind of basic analysis we can provide that could be that provide educational value to cities and to local communities who are trying to better understand the emissions basis of kind of trying to integrate this. So the tool that we have, and this is one of two tools that we have, this is the Energy and Emissions Estimator tool. The other tool is actually a project development tool, a very simple one that actually DOE actually used for a resiliency, CHP resiliency tool that they have created as part of the accelerator work that they've done around resiliency. But this tool, what it does is it looks at some pollutants that are referred to as criteria pollutants in the EPA jargon. And then what it does is it takes a look at transmission and distribution losses. It takes data from this EPA database called eGrid that looks at emissions inventory. And now there are actually two different inventory databases that are out there. But we continued using eGrid for this. And what the tool does is, coming back to the complexity, this will kind of give you a sense of the complexity that Dan was referring the minute you start looking at CHP. You need to start figuring out, what kind of and these again behind the meter that I'm talking about primarily. What kind of CHP system are you using? How do you plan to use it? What kind of fuel are you using? What kind of thermal use is it? How is that heat going to be used? Is it going to be used for heating and cooling or just heating? And then what kind of emission control system are you going to be putting it in? And then the system kind of does its algorithm. It's actually a tool that's publicly available, and it's part of something that's in that flyer. And then it kind of gives you a preliminary understanding of how much emissions are being avoided by putting in an energy efficient system like CHP. But in our case, what we did is we ran it first for the CHP. We ran it for the PV actually. We could do around 4 PV on that same system. And what we did is for the CHP provides you both heat and electricity. The PV is actually displacing electricity that's being used, right? If you were running both of them together, this at this point does not get into nuances on how is the CHP going to be grid enabling? Is it going to be renewable enabling? But at this point, it was assumed that it was running base load, right? Because a lot of the ones that initially that came out, I would say even until last year and even some right now, are going in assuming there cannot be any failure, right? These are hospitals. These are university campuses. They cannot afford to fail. They have to keep running, right? So they would rather put in something that will allow them to keep their renewables running by putting the CHP, right? And the proposal that Connecticut DEP had shown was that this was going to be a community-based system. The CHP and the PV were going to help allow the community to have the shelter in place by connecting a community center, a school, the city hall, and a senior apartment. They had already figured out some configuration of what kind of system. And I'm getting into this a little bit just to kind of point out that there are these elements that we haven't gone into a lot of detail yesterday and today, but these are the kind of components. It would be, it's great to have someone on staff who can help walk you through this and know what kind of what kind of help are you going to need externally too, as you're trying to figure out how you're going to get to resilience, right? So again, this was like a reciprocating system using natural gas, using a PV array that would be accompanied by battery storage as needed. Where will it be located, right? Those are the kind of factors to that going. And what the system showed is that when you run the CHP system alone, so this is how the data was input. Just going through it very quickly here. And again, I'm sorry, this is like tiny, but what it shows is the percent reduction you would achieve if you ran the CHP system alone or you ran the PV system alone. And then if you, there should be one more, if you were combining both, right, what kind of emission reductions are you going to end up seeing, right? Our desire is recognizing, the reason why we held off doing anything more complex are all the challenges that all of you kind of have even spoken to. What does resiliency mean when you're looking at sources? And our conclusion has been that you definitely need to take a systems approach the minute you're looking at energy resiliency. You definitely need to factor in how you're going to be balancing out these different sources. I think we're going to continue to build this out a little bit again for where CHP is going to be used, or what kind of storage will it be using, what kind of solar would it be using, but then turn our users over to a REACT-Lite or a DERCAM, which are, these are systems, these are models that can look at the complexity at a source level and kind of give you some idea and then get you thinking more about like what exactly are you going to be looking at. Moving to the systems model also kind of takes me to the next presentation by my other colleagues who've been working with communities around resiliency planning. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. Contact information is off of your website. And Michelle is going to walk you through one of these toolkits that their office has developed, looking at and where, again, we typically come in pre-resiliency, kind of pre-disaster stage, I would say. But in any case, therefore, solutions. Absolutely.
Going on your statistics and finding, this was Microgrid programs in Connecticut, and I know different places, similar situations, also ran evaluations on what the Microgrid brings, in terms of including CHP, PV, et cetera. Did you run any analyses of the Microgrid, its effect, because they actually show enhanced results?
No, we did not end up running any such analysis. I think our focus has been more, and we continue to see a lot of interest in people just wanting to better understand the microgrid concept. How do you actually develop it, and then how does one actually work with the other different programs and that may be at a state level?
The reason I asked you is because the results have been showing consistently that with the microgrid system, combining these different elements, you actually get better results.
Oh, that's excellent. No, I would love to know more about it. So absolutely, if you can kind of point that to me, that would be great to learn. I mean, in our case, a part of it is also being integrating internally. We have a sister program that works just on green power, and another program that works with corporations and providing tools for them to calculate emissions. And last year, in fact, when one of Dan's colleagues spoke about the re-up light at this Sustainable Communities Conference, was a better understanding those local communities who came, they wanted to have off microgrids, and how do these different clean energy resources come together in that. So, but thanks for letting me know, and I'd love to know more about it later.
I have a short question.
Sure.
So what do you do with the heat in the summertime? Do you go back to grid supply electricity, or?
If you're running a CHP, the desire is to see that you're using the thermal on site. The CHP system is designed to handle thermal. It's the electricity component that you'll end up getting from the grid at most times. So you wouldn't technically even put in a CHP if you know you're not going to be able to use your thermal.
Absorption chillers could take that look.
It could, but it also adds cost then to the system that you're putting in. So yeah, but technically you're right. The absorption chiller would help in that.
Mentioned yesterday that New Jersey received a $200 million Sandy relief grant through HUD, and we use that to establish an energy resilience bank.
That's right.
And within that, we're doing designer construction on, it's all CHP at 13 hospitals and 3 wastewater plants.
That's what we see, yeah, and I think the work that New Jersey, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, so New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and New York have done a lot of work around it, and it's great to hear more about the hospitals that have been funded through New Jersey. The ones in New York, a lot of funding went to multifamily housing, actually. There were some that went to hospitals and universities. There were some systems, universities, NYU, for instance, Langone had their system. They had to basically move their systems up. So they could still run it on an island mode, but wouldn't be flooded out, right? So.
Thanks, Niharika, for inviting me, and it's great to be here. My name is Michelle Maidley. I work in EPA's Office of Community Revitalization, and we've had many names over the years. We started as a Smart Growth Program. We were recently called the Office of Sustainable Communities, but we work directly with communities, providing technical assistance on a range of topics, including resilience. We also do other education and outreach, including publications that my colleague Megan Sussman, who was here yesterday, kind of put this together. So there are some other publications that are available online. So today I'll be focusing on the Regional Resilience Toolkit, which is a new toolkit that came out of a partnership with FEMA. My colleague Abby Hall is on the line. She's on the West Coast. This is definitely her project, and we've worked together on a number of different topics related to resilience. So just going to talk about the toolkit and how it was designed and its purpose, what's unique about it, and part of that is the partnership between EPA and FEMA. We have an MOA set up that really enables us to coordinate at an interagency level and to build a stronger federal framework focused not just on post-disaster recovery, which I've heard a few disasters mentioned, sort of that there is a lot of funding that comes post-disaster but also at the pre-disaster phase, which is hazard mitigation planning. So this is a tool that is definitely part of that framework of hazard mitigation planning. And this, our partnership, EPA's partnership with FEMA really started and was jump-started with some post-disaster recovery work in Iowa in 2008 following some flooding there. So it's kind of continued and evolved, and this is the latest iteration. And I think there are probably a number of different definitions, working definitions of resilience. For us, this is, resilience is about building the capacity of the community to prepare for, withstand, recover, and maintain its identity in the face of current or future hazards, which allows for continuity of a community, especially if a disaster does occur. So we're thinking of this regional resilience toolkit. It's a holistic toolkit, and it's designed for a multi-jurisdictional scale. So definitely thinking about the regional scale being an important way to tackle resilience. Needing those investments that cross jurisdictional lines and that are larger scale can create more efficiencies and more effectiveness, while also recognizing that there's local authorities at play for implementing these ideas and spending their local funds. So that's just, one of the unique aspects and features of this toolkit. It also addresses multiple hazards. You could fold in, similar to some of the other models and tools we've heard about already, if you're more prone to earthquakes and sea level rise or forest fires, those can all be kind of incorporated and folded into using this toolkit. It also applies to different assets. So when we talked about this, energy has come up peripherally, but with sort of greater partnership and collaboration with the energy sector and folks in this room, I think we could really expand upon that. And a really key feature is that it aligns with different plan requirements, particularly FEMA local hazard mitigation plan requirements. So this sort of weave that you see is just an assembly of all of the plans that locals are working on and sort of have requirements for. Could be land use plans, strategic plans, local hazard mitigation plans, capital improvement plans. So the last thing we wanted to do was add a new plan. So the idea is that this toolkit really is about strengthening and integrating across plans. So strengthening the concept of resilience being folded in and bringing partners who are working on all these different plans. Sometimes there's collaboration happening already, but really kind of putting resilience at the center of that and putting that at the forefront and being able to, not detract from the current planning that's already taking place, but being additive and complementary. The other piece, in addition to this planning focus, is thinking ahead to the funding that is going to have to occur to make these large-scale resilience projects occur. So thinking about those annual budgets and planning ahead for that, folding that into those capital improvement budgets, thinking about other outside funding sources as well. Okay, so these are the 5 steps of the toolkit. This is, start with community engagement, community and stakeholder engagement, move to assessment. Step 3, action. This is a very action-oriented toolkit. It's not overly process-heavy. There is some, emphasis on doing some vulnerability assessments, but just moving through that pretty rapidly to get to act, fund, and measure. And the idea is you could jump in at any stage if you've already kind of done an assessment, maybe using some tool from NREL or some other partner. You could kind of step ahead and you've got that assessment complete. This is also sort of a multi-stakeholder approach. So the idea is that you could focus as a community or set of communities coming together at a regional scale. They might prioritize transportation as the main asset they're going to focus on the first time they do a resilience planning effort. But once they've completed that, you could come back and focus on energy. You could focus on the education system and schools as an asset class as well. So each step does have appendices with resources, so links to other tools and resources that might be available, because again, this is about kind of tying it all together holistically, focusing on resilience, as well as some worksheets as now it's publicly available, people could pick this up theoretically and just work through it. So there are worksheets to kind of guide that process. And I'll just note that, at this point, in developing the toolkit, we had worked with 3 different pilot regions in California through that partnership, and Abby's leading up another set of 4 to 5 regions that we're working through this with and providing kind of that wraparound hands-on like facilitation and technical assistance. So, you know, I think having the toolkit available online, people could pick it up, but it really is enhanced by having kind of a third-party outside facilitator. So step one, engage. This is really about building trust across stakeholders and including community residents, focusing on social equity. We know that disasters can exacerbate inequalities, so that's a really key feature of this, is kind of going beyond the traditional just checking the box engagement and bringing people in, identifying community values and bringing that into how you prioritize what hazards to focus on, how to really approach that regional resilience planning. And the other piece is to think ahead to the step of funding and thinking about how this is almost like a campaign. You need to start from the beginning, build that constituent support for making those hard choices and making those investments and taking from those local budgets to address resilience. Step two is the assessment. You know, there might have been a recent trigger like a disaster, so this can be employed in a post-disaster context, but ideally it's pre-disaster. And you're thinking ahead and maybe thinking ahead about you want to protect your port and it links to tourism in your community. So there's an economic driver there that you're thinking about protecting and becoming more resilient. Also, you need to describe your hazards and create that hazard impact statement. And this is where the hazard mitigation planning really kind of folds in nicely. And in terms of determining what you're going to focus on for going through this kind of at a rapid scale, you can take a prioritization approach to summarize your assets, your key issues, vulnerability, and potential consequences. And you might focus on one asset class. Like if you looked at economy, natural environment, critical services, or built environment, you might choose something specific within that. So for the economy, you might look at, you know, the major employers in the region and what resilience would look like for them and how that kind of has impacts across the region and why you need to protect it and what you can do. That's where step three, act. What are the strategies to really become more resilient? So this is again another rapid prioritization process. What are the plans, regulations, small, short-term projects you can do to keep momentum going as you work on policy and putting plans in place. So focus on strategies you can pull off, but also thinking about those long-term major investments that need to happen. And here's just a sample of the evaluation, a way you could evaluate along criteria that's in the toolkit. There's feasibility, economy, environment. If your region or community has already agreed upon criteria that you've developed through some kind of coalition, you could apply that as well. Again, similar to other kind of toolkits and models, take what is useful to you. And so step four, funding and financing. This is not just about providing a list of grants that communities and regions might be able to go to. This is about thinking how to really sell the importance of this type of project, building your network of funders, looking at your local budgets, bonds, taxes to pull from, and having kind of that diversified, comprehensive funding strategy for resilience. Step five is measure. What you measure matters, I think is the adage, or maybe that's vice versa. So it's always important. You have to be accountable not just to funders, but to the public who you've been engaging all along. Step one, engagement, reporting out on what kind of outputs you're seeing, and then the ultimate outcome of becoming more resilient and whatever that specific resilience goal is for your process. So I'm just going to close with a little bit of an anecdote from when the pilots occurred in California, in Mount Shasta, California. Through that process, stakeholders really mentioned that the vulnerability of the electric grid with regards to winter storms and to fires was a chief concern. So there was an interest in setting up a microgrid around the community center to support that. So that goal of energy independence from the grid during power outages was a goal, and having that kind of energy independence could also lead to having cooling and heating centers enabled during those kinds of outages, having the overall reliability of critical services and communications during a potential disaster scenario. So we have seen energy come up in these conversations, and we're talking about a range of different sectors coming to the table, and we'd love to be able to collaborate more with folks from the energy sector and have them at the table and have this be folded in. So thank you for letting us present and share a little bit about this. And yeah, thanks to NARUC for making the connection.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple questions. We do have Abby on the phone. I think she can self-unmute if she'd like to speak up. Mike?
Maybe just an example. The volunteer fire company in my town has been around for 100 years, pretty much doing the same thing. But 18 months ago, we established a swift water, floodwater rescue team to respond to the flash flooding that we've been getting recently. So it's just an example of climate resilience that we have.
Yeah, good to hear about. So any feedback that you guys have for me? Maybe not questions, like is this resonating, this kind of multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach? Are any of you all involved or supporting regions or communities in conversations like this, or?
Yeah, absolutely. In Wisconsin, we're not calling it climate resilience work, but it's exactly what we're working on. We're working through emergency management to engage Department of Public Works and communities in every county and tribe in the state to really bring all the plans up to a certain place. And then with 10 tribes or communities, we'll be looking at doing sort of a deep dive where we get the stakeholder input. And I really like this model. I think the answer is you can't manage what you don't measure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Whatever. There's a lot of things to talk about. We just need to measure everything. That's the main thing. But yeah, I think EPA has a ton of, you guys have some great resources on your website. It's also some travel-specific resources that are really cool that I've been grabbing and using. And so I really appreciate this. And I think we can talk about climate, but is it always the first thing we say?
Yeah, and I think actually that is kind of one of the benefits is finding a value that everybody can agree upon. You don't have to use the word climate to talk about resilience.
But I really do like the measuring of emissions too, because going back to my comment on diesel generators, there's a cost to that, and there's particulates that come with that. We have so many diesel generators around the state, and then the energy security coordinator said I have to make sure we have diesel for those generators. So the more that I can displace them, the better it's off I'm doing.
Like you said, in the planning, how you really can strengthen, what already is in existence in terms of generally emergency, response, restoration, preparation, response, restoration planning. But you're building in, I think, vital elements that can pump up the energy assurance side and help in the transition of bringing more sustainable resources to building resiliency, moving out of the traditional approaches, strategies for resilience. So that's where I see how this is very beneficial.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how something like the REACT tool that Dan was talking about earlier could be one of the tools that ends up being used as this type of process goes and identifies key centers and locations where you would need some additional resources. So it's a great way of thinking about a variety of these different options coming together.
Yeah, I see a lot of synergy. Well, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to move into Nicholas Gutierrez with Berkeley National Lab. So Nicholas is remote, so we're going to see how this works.
All right, can you guys hear me? Great, all right. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this presentation. What I have for you today is basically a general overview to our microgrid and distributed energy modeling tool, DERCAM. So DERCAM stands for the Distributed Energy Resources Customer Adoption Model. That's quite a lot, but really what it is it's a tool meant to assist utility customers with the process of selecting and sizing distributed energy resources to sort of maximize their benefits. So if you go to the next slide, thinking about this problem really generally, the motivations for customers to adopt DERs or microgrids can be pretty diverse. You know, they can be focused on reducing their energy costs or reducing their environmental impacts in terms of CO2 emissions, or installing some level of resilience to unexpected grid outages, you know, or it could be some combination of all of these things. And the objectives that they have are going to be really influential on the best design that they should put into place. So if you go to the next slide, thinking about, you know, what other characteristics of a utility customer or building site matter, well, the ways they pay for energy, the electricity tariffs and fuel costs and energy rates and all of that, as well as how they consume energy. So the characteristics of their load profiles, and also the consumption in terms of different end uses, you know, that's going to matter. Climate and weather data is going to affect the suitability of certain technologies to assist them, particularly related to solar generation. Information about the technologies themselves, you know, which are viable to be considered, how do they perform, how much do they cost. And then for some sites, you know, if you have large campuses where you have multiple buildings and an internal network that connects those buildings, there might be some questions about the topology of that. You can go to the next slide now, thanks. So then, you know, with all that information in place, what do you need to generate to actually move a project forward? Well, you need basic performance metrics. You need to know, you know, what are your, you know, total capital investments, how do they perform over time, what's your payback period. You need to know what portfolio of new technologies you're going to install, and the capacities for each of those. You usually want to know what the typical operational schedule of those technologies are. You know, how are they actually being used? How do they influence things like the purchasing of energy from the grid or the sale of energy back to the grid, that sort of thing. And then again, for these large sites, you want to know where within the internal microgrid or campus network these resources should be placed. So if you go to the next slide, this sort of presents the, you know, big picture landscape for the challenge of designing these types of systems, you know, and this is really the problem that DERCAM has been designed to help address. Our philosophy is, you know, these energy systems are all connected, so they all interact, and so the sizing decisions and designs of each component is going to potentially have significant effects on every other piece of the system. And so our philosophy is that the best way to do this is with a holistic optimization. So we're looking at all these systems simultaneously and then making the design decisions together so that they all kind of complement one another and produce a system that maximizes the total value of each of the assets that are placed there. Next slide, please. So thinking generically about the process for deploying a microgrid, you know, these are some pretty generic steps, but it starts with a concept and goes through increasingly detailed layers of design before, you know, being approved by utility, securing financing, and then doing the construction and operation. And just to highlight, you know, where does this tool actually add value? If you go to the next slide, it's our belief that first and foremost, DERCAM is a tool that allows you to basically get a concept down, right? You don't have to, you know, it's doing all the sizing decisions for you, and so you really just need to define your site, and that allows you to develop a concept. But more importantly, it also allows you to sort of do an exploratory design by iterating through different models and sort of refining your approach and you know, learning from each round of analysis. You're able to basically explore uncertainties and go through different scenarios in order to really flesh out a design before moving to the next stages of your process. And that's where these other arrows kind of come into play. By doing this exploratory design early on, you're really able to de-risk later steps of the process. So in particular, related to like utility approval, you're able to, you know, understand what the expected impact to your interaction with the grid is going to be, as well as your sort of long-term performance, your economic performance, which is going to be helpful in securing financing. I think most importantly is, you know, a lot of these microgrid systems get built, and the notion of you know, what kind of savings and benefits they're going to have is really abstract, or it's, you know, it's a really rough estimate. And so by doing this thorough exploratory design, we're really able to get a better understanding of what the operational benefit's going to be, and therefore lead to a more successful microgrid deployment. Next slide, please. So getting into the nuts and bolts of DIRCam, what does it actually include? You know, like I said, it's doing this holistic optimization, considering all these different dimensions of design. So we want to make sure that we're including a lot of relevant technologies. So on the generation side, you know, obviously you have solar and, you know, a number of different generator technologies, including CHP and fuel cells and things like that, as well as, you know, less common technologies on the renewable side. So solar, thermal, wind, and run-of-river, hydro are also available. Likewise, with energy storage, we want to make sure we have a lot of different technologies. So that includes really conventional things like battery storage, but also thermal storage, so heat, chilled water, ice storage. We also have, you know, hydrogen storage and other less common technologies. And then also electric vehicles, which are not necessarily a storage technology, but operate similarly as batteries and can be used to support the objectives of the microgrid. Load management is also an important component. You know, you can kind of inexpensively install demand side management technologies to help support the system by doing things like demand response or shifting or curtailing loads when you need to. And then most recently, we're also looking at how energy efficiency investments can be used to support the microgrid as well. Because, you know, obviously, if you're able to reduce the load of the system under all times, you know, when the grid is connected and when it isn't, that's going to reduce the level of capacity of DERs that you're going to have to install. So next slide, please. So the way DIRCam does the optimization, you know, for each asset, it's looking at what we call the stacked value. So basically, we're looking at all the different ways that asset can generate money or produce savings. So that includes things like, you know, reducing the volumetric energy purchases from the grid, or flattening your demand profile to reduce demand charges. You can also export electricity back to the grid under certain circumstances, provide demand response or ancillary services back to the grid. With energy efficiency, you're able to reduce overall energy consumption, which obviously saves money. And then, you know, you're also able to improve the overall efficiency of the system. So CHP is a great example of that. You're able to sort of improve the efficiency of serving electrical and thermal loads simultaneously, and so that also produces savings. The tool is going to look at each of these. You know, you don't have to sort of select them. It basically looks at all these different opportunities to generate value, and then comes up with a portfolio of technologies that best complement one another in producing value across all these different streams. So next slide, please. So these are some of the advanced features that help distinguish DIRCam from other tools in this space. So this graphic here illustrates this first point about how DIRCam allows you to model these multi-building networked microgrids that include both power flow and heat flow between nodes. So look, you know, looking at larger sites where the siting of the technology is going to matter. We also have a focus on what we call multi-energy microgrids. So because we have technologies that focus on both the electrical side and the thermal side of the consumption, we're able to produce a microgrid solution that really sort of wrings out all of the potential value. Getting really advanced, we can look at the design of both AC and DC microgrids, and then for critical facilities where the operational security is really important, we can do N-1 contingency. So meaning if one of your DER assets goes down, the site's able to maintain operation. So that's something that we've used for like Department of Defense sites, or in some cases remote off-grid microgrid sites where relying on the grid or falling back on reliance on the grid is not really an option. Next slide, please. So DIRCam itself is generically is sort of an optimization engine. It's something that we use for a number of different research projects at Berkeley Lab. But we also make it available as a tool to the public. So this is sort of the generic, excuse me, the generic architecture that we employ for that. So we basically have a DIRCam model or DIRCam optimizer on a server, that we allow users to access through an interface that we make available. And that interface, actually, if you go to the next slide, I think it shows that. So this is what we call the DIRCam desktop UI. It's basically just a structured environment that allows users to build and modify their microgrid models, which consist of a number of different data tables, and then send those to our servers to be optimized, and then gives them a series of dashboards to navigate and explore through the results. Next slide, please. So one of the key challenges in building models is almost often the collecting the data. So in order to help users with that process, we provide a number of different data resources and libraries to get them started. So that includes load profile database using reference buildings types across a number of different US climate zones, insolation profiles, solar profiles for hundreds of US locations. We have an electricity tariff database, although I think there more recently have been a number of public resources that are a little more comprehensive on this front. And then DER technology libraries. So here we provide sort of default values for both the performance and cost of a lot of different DER technologies, including solar and battery storage, but also dozens of CHP and generator technologies, which can sometimes be difficult to track down specific data on. So you really don't have to come into the tool with a lot of data on hand to get started. We try to make that as easy as possible. Next slide, please. So given that that's all how DIRCam works, what can you actually do with the tool? Well, most simply, you can do a quick feasibility study. If you have a building in mind and you know the characteristics and you have the data to do that, you can plug that all into the tool and run the optimization and get results back here, which will provide you sort of metrics across a number of different dimensions, including your capital costs, your energy performance, your CO2 emissions, the value over time, that sort of things. You can kind of assess whether this single project is feasible or not. But if you go to the next slide, I think the way people typically use the tool is by constructing a number of different scenarios to help them sort of flesh out the concept of a project. So that often involves them sweeping across one or more different dimensions of the project, including, which technologies and costs. That's obviously something that's changing pretty rapidly in some cases, or tariffs and energy rates, which is another thing that changes over time. They might have a number of different load profiles they want to consider, whether that's, with or without energy efficiency measures, or including different building loads within the microgrid network. But you really have the flexibility to construct these scenarios across whatever dimensions are interesting to your project. Next slide, please. So this is an example of that. And actually, so I want to highlight, this is results that came out of work we did in partnership with the Department of Energy, and a colleague of our partner there, Greg, is in the room. I believe he has physical copies of a report that we helped develop along with NREL and DOE that highlights how state and local governments can employ tools like DIRCam to help them explore using DERs to support both resilience in key facilities, but also to reduce energy costs when the grid is connected. So if you want to learn more, I would seek out Greg. I don't know if he's raised his hand to ask more. He might have. Yep. Awesome, great. So I think he might have some physical copies of that guidebook as well. But I just want to highlight really briefly what we've done here. So this is a single facility. This is one of the partner facilities that we did some analysis for, and what we're doing here is looking at modeling an outage and then increasing the level of critical load that needs to be served during that outage. So that's the bottom axis here. Starting with the blue sky optimal, if the grid is always there, what's the optimal set of technologies to install? And then as you increase the requirement to serve outage or to serve load during outage, how does that change the system design? And so you see on the left, we have increasing levels of installation of CHP, which is a good technology for this facility to serve load during outage. And then on the right, we have how that impacts the total annual energy savings. So that includes both the operational savings by reducing the grid purchases, but also the cost, the levelized cost of the investment in the new technologies. So what we see is, in most cases, you're actually in net saving money by installing these DERs because you're reducing your grid purchases, you're building resilience against outage, but you're also saving money. It's only in the last case where you're actually paying a slight tax, essentially, in order to install 100% resiliency in this outage scenario. So this kind of highlights, these win-win scenarios. That's an analysis you can do using DERCAM. Next slide, please. So then again, just to highlight, these really advanced features, I don't have detailed results here, but this is a case study that we did with the University of Alaska, where we actually looked at modeling an entire town within DERCAM. So this is a remote off-grid distribution network, and they were interested in just exploring, how DERs could help them both reduce costs and also increase their resiliency in case certain assets went down. And so if you go to the next slide, this shows somewhat chaotically the construction of this town scale microgrid within DERCAM. And I won't go into the details of the results, but you see at each of these nodes, there's little icons indicating what the recommended DER investment capacities are in order to achieve the specific objective of this town. So you can really do some pretty elaborate modeling using this tool. Next slide, please. So then just to wrap up, this isn't a feature that's available in the public interface of DERCAM, but this is kind of the direction of the research that we're going at Berkeley Lab. And so fundamentally, DERCAM provides a view into how customers are responding to incentives to support their own objectives, right? They're looking to build resiliency or reduce costs in response to tariffs or investment incentives or revenue opportunities. But how that impacts the grid more broadly is kind of still a question mark. So what we're attempting to do here with what we're calling the integrated modeling tool is provide a tool to regulators and policymakers and folks like that to understand this challenge. And so looking at this graphic at the bottom, we see this as sort of an iterative approach. We start with a model of a distribution grid circuit, and we have some information of what the structure of that is and what are the customers within that network. We then use DERCAM to look at how some of those customers are going to respond to the incentives as they exist to install new technologies, and then how those technologies are used. So that's going to impact how they buy and import and export electricity over time. So we're able to use that data to model the grid impact, and then assess costs, and then look at how you can, in order to meet those costs, if you're going to need to expand capacity in that network or make changes or whatever, basically linking those costs back to the tariff or whatever price landscapes exist in order to essentially converge on a solution that supports both the grid objectives and the customer's sort of response to the incentives that exist. So if you go to the next slide, we have a pretty simple example of what that looks like. So this isn't a result of that iterative process. This isn't the optimized solution essentially, but this is a snapshot of what's happening. So on the left we have a no DER scenario, and on the right I think it's PV and battery storage is permitted, and certain customers are adopting that. And this is I believe a peak period. So what we see is that as customers deploy these technologies, in some cases we're able to alleviate problematic conditions that exist on the existing network. So in this case, they have undervoltage at the end of this branch, and when the DERs are installed, you see that problem goes away. But if you go to the next slide, we see that that it's not always as rosy a picture. Here in like the non-peak conditions, we see that actually by allowing customers to adopt these technologies, we're introducing other problems that exist. So the point here is not that we have a tool yet that's able to, design tariffs and incentives that completely alleviate these problems. But what we are building is a tool that allows policymakers a finer granularity view into what's happening as customers evolve, and gives them the opportunity to make interventions. Next slide, please. So then, generically, all this kind of falls under the umbrella of DIRCAM. But circling back to the publicly available tool, I just want to highlight a few areas that we're planning to do some additional development. The first is a simple API to allow users to send and receive text files and sort of circumvent the user interface. What we found is that folks who get experience with the tool tend to want to, their vision for how they want to use it expands significantly, and they don't want to have to manually build files. And so creating a way for them to programmatically interact with the optimization engine is a priority for us. Also, to make matters easier, we want to sort of assist them with data support for energy efficiency measures. It can be really difficult to quantify both the cost and the impact of energy efficiency measures. So we want to sort of provide resources to help them do that quickly. The Better Building Challenge results that I showed you earlier, I think that's something that the feedback we've gotten from the state and local government partners that we've presented that with, it seemed really helpful. And so we're looking at ways to sort of automate that scenario-based resiliency analysis to basically allow them to build one model and then get a suite of results that kind of capture the different levels of resilience that they could build out. And then finally, we have a focus on expanding the options on the ancillary service value streams of the microgrid. I think it's becoming clear that grid services is going to become an increasingly important revenue stream for microgrids moving forward. And so we want to make sure that, given that this is a tool where you're planning a system that could be in place for decades, that we're capturing the value potential for these assets, moving forward in time. Next slide, please. So then just to wrap up, I want to reiterate, right now, DIRCAM is free to use. We have this public user interface that's available on our website. You can register for access to that at the website listed here. And then if you have any questions, technical questions about using the tool or general questions about DIRCAM or other research that we do, you can always reach out to us, either myself directly, or we have this sort of generic DIRCAM support email, which is monitored by myself and colleagues at the lab. So with that, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to the presentation. We're always excited to share our work with, relevant stakeholders, and it sounds like this audience is certainly that. So thank you.
Greg, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, let me, this is Greg. I am here. And as I mentioned yesterday, I'm with the State Energy Program. And so we support state energy offices through mostly direct funding, is what you're all probably mostly aware of, but technical assistance, which is my favorite part of the job. And my colleague, John Agan, is sort of my counterpart on the local side, or a counterpart. So he is part of a team called the Partnerships and Technical Assistance Team. And he and a colleague, Brooke Hollerman, have spent a fair amount of time over the last year putting together some case studies. And so I've got 2 copies of the work he has done. This looks at, there's high-level assessments of size and potential on 3 facilities in North Carolina, Oregon, and Florida. And it's 2 public buildings, I think, in North Carolina and Florida. Florida is a school district, and then Oregon is a public building. And so, and some case studies and some step-by-step, some step-by-step guides for using the tool. So probably a pared-down version of what is already offered for DIRCAM and for REOPT Lite. So he's used both of these tools for these kind of case studies. I'll send them around, and I think we can work there. I can work through Kiera and Sam to circulate the final version of these. We're getting some final feedback on these hard copies I'm circulating, but would love your input.
you know, and if you're interested in a similar type of analysis, you know, I think we'd be open to talking about that. So it's a pretty exciting set of work that he and colleagues have put together. And so and I'll just say that you know, I think one of the partners has maybe an interest in going beyond what the work is analysis and saying, so we've done, you know, analysis with DIRCAM and REOPT, you know, what does that mean for our actual investment in the state? So love to talk to you more about it. I don't know if there's going to be follow-up calls, but we could do that as well. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
So Nicholas, there's questions in the room. We'll try to make sure that you can hear them. If we need to, I'll repeat them. Just let us know if you can't.
Okay.
Let's see. I think Megan,
when you consider the different resources, do you factor in the challenges and the increased cost in interconnection? Because when you have the DER interconnect, one major grid impact is the backflow, and that will trigger upgrades to the substation or the feeder or the transformer. How do you consider that factors in your analysis? And I guess it's an optimization tool as well. So.
Yeah, so that's a great point, if I heard correctly. So in terms of the interconnection studies and approval that's needed, we don't take that directly into account. You know, obviously that's going to vary a lot by location. I think what we're trying to do is arm the modeler or whoever with the information they need to basically make that process as easy as possible. And so in terms of like power backflow, that's something that you have options to constrain within the model. So if that's something you don't want to see and you want your design to reflect that, you can constrain the model that way. But in general, it's really about, I think that's maybe something you would want to build scenarios around. So if you have concerns that a design with a higher level of power flowing back to the grid is going to create a problematic process of getting it approved, then you might do some different scenarios. But we don't. I think it's a little too complex for us to consider that directly.
Yeah, so this is David Earn, Energy Commission. So it seems like there's some similarities in capability between REOPT and DIRCAM. I'm wondering if there's a comparison of when one is more valuable than the other in certain types of analyses.
Could you throw Homer into that question too?
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't think there's been a detailed study of how they're similar and different. I think they do have a core set of functionality that's similar. I think I tried to highlight areas where DIRCAM is distinct around its advanced features. I think Homer is fundamentally much more different because it's more a simulation tool than a optimization tool. But I think in terms of the workflow of designing a system, both optimization and simulation kind of have their place and have value. I think there might have been a paper highlighting distinctions between DIRCAM and Homer, but it's at least a few years old. So I can maybe find that and share that with you if you want to like get into the details of that.
Yeah, and David, the case studies, yeah.
So I'm just looking through the case study. I see there's a table in there.
Yeah.
The case is the difference between REOPT Lite and DIRCAM.
Right, and it highlights some of the areas where there's some flexibility in both of the tools. But and I should also mention that you know, John sort of kicks the work off mentioning that energy efficiency should be sort of considered first or, you know, upfront, you know, as that has benefits for resilience.
No, I think Nicholas characterized it well. I think I'm not an expert on the DIRCAM model. I think the general optimization formulation are the same concept. Clearly, REOPT didn't describe in the light tool anything about the local distribution network, so we're not modeling at that level of fidelity. So I think DIRCAM is going deeper on the system within the boundaries of behind the meter or within the community, where the REOPT model isn't doing that. But then internal to the model, I'm sure there's some differences about how the resources might be modeled or something. But I think general formulation It's an optimization formulation, math formulation. There likely are decisions that we developers make that are different internal. I think we kind of arrived at this. We're kind of at a similar place, but we're, obviously, as I mentioned, the Berkeley DERCAM tool has that distribution network, so you look at those constraints, and we're not, as I mentioned, without lighting, just kind of looking at the system as a lumped bus. So if I recall the history, Nicholas, I think DERCAM originally was primarily developed for CHP, where REOP.
Yeah, that's correct.
And we kind of marched along and merged. We got this funding from the AMO to integrate CHP now. With DERCAM the way it was along the way. I think so. At some level, the capabilities are similar, but the Better Business paper kind of describes, or the Better Buildings paper describes what you might take.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, so I had actually two questions, and I think this was really helpful. One is, I know we've all talked about energy efficiency, but I kind of look at it again in a bigger light now, that in terms of individual systems, if you're really optimizing energy efficiency, your need for DER is going to increase. You have different asset values. Values that they bring. Of course, EE cannot provide all resiliency, but in terms of overall cost and all of that. So how are you thinking about modeling energy efficiency? Because it would be awesome to be able to do it, but how are you thinking about doing it?
Yeah, sure. So I think a number of years ago, we tried to basically incorporate building shells or passive investments and upgrades into DERCAM, but that's really challenging because DERCAM is a linear optimization model, and so all the constraints need to be captured in a linear fashion. But if you're looking at the thermal performance of a building, there's a lot of nonlinear effects going on there. And so I think ultimately that feature that we built out didn't end up being as useful as we had hoped. The approach here in terms of energy efficiency is intended to be much more generic. So it's basically thinking about it as an investment that changes the load shape. And so you have to define like a cost and a lifetime for that investment, and then an impact in terms of how it changes the load shape. So you can model any energy efficiency measure that way, but the challenge is that as a user, you probably have no idea how like an improvement to your chiller is going to impact the consumption profile of your cooling load. And so that was one of the points I was trying to make at the end in terms of new developments, is that we have the ability now to consider these generic energy efficiency measures, but users can't make much use of them yet. But there's a lot of information out there about how different energy efficiency measures, like what kind of impact they can have on different building types and what kind of costs are associated with those. And so we're hoping to build out these data resources to allow people to say like, oh, I have a building that looks like this, it's this size and this vintage, and I'm interested in these types of energy efficiency measures, maybe like lighting retrofits and HVAC improvements. And then have the tool essentially create those scenarios for them so that the burden of the data is not on them. That work remains to be done. So right now it's still a feature that's mostly in development, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Nicholas. So, Kirsten, can you switch on the next slide? I think I clicked out of it. Okay. So I want to thank all of the presenters for joining us today, either in person or virtually. We really appreciate your time. And just as we wrap up, kind of a hint, and sorry, I'm back here just for the phone, so people can hear me. So as we continue going with this state working group in terms of what's coming next, I think NASEO and NARUC, we will put together a summary of the workshop, and we'll include all of the resources and websites that were mentioned over the last few days. We'll also share slides and recordings of the webinars. I know there was a little conversation yesterday about putting together some kind of repository so that additional resources can be shared easily with states and kept in one place as opposed to just emailed out to members of the working group. So we'll work on that as well. And then we'll also come up with a schedule for some webinars and working group conference calls this spring. I know we had talked about maybe inviting CIFA to speak on one of those about their work with DC. And we have some other ideas as well that have come up in conversations over the last couple of days and in the needs assessment calls with our working group members. So we're excited to share those details with you all in the coming weeks. And Sam and Kirsten, anything to add from you all?
No, we're just looking forward to working with you all, and please feel free to, if you have any ideas, suggestions, concerns, questions, needs, don't be shy and reach out to us. We're here for you. And we'll also include in our send out of things a summary of these 2 days from our notes. But feel free to, again, augment, add, and any suggestions. We're here to listen to you, and please feel free to reach out to us.
And once again, just a thank you to all of our presenters and everyone who attended this workshop, and then if you were here for NASEO last week or a NARUC meeting this week. So we really appreciate you being here. I also want to thank Sam and Kirsten at NASEO and Shanika as well for all of their help in putting this event together, and my colleagues Danielle and Charles here. And of course, many thanks to Dan and his office for funding this effort.
And the biggest thanks goes to Kira, because she was really the spearheading.
Safe travels home. We hope to see you at a future neighbor or NASEO meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,